Welcome to Season 3 of Coming Home to Ourselves, where we aim to bridge the gap between the sacred and modern-day responsibilities, complex chronic illness, and life. I am your host, Denise Elysa, practitioner and teacher, and I aim to empower you to become your own self-healer and an embodied co-creator. I am not a medical professional, and nothing said in this podcast should be misconstrued as medical advice or replacement of such. To learn more about my philosophies or practices, visit DeniseElysa.com. Hi, friends. I can't wait to introduce our guest today. Liz Powell is a registered dietitian who earned her Bachelor of Science in Dietetics from the University of British Columbia. She began her career as a clinical dietitian at Vancouver General Hospital, working in acute medicine, the ICU, and geriatrics. In 2017, she founded Yaletown Nutrition, a nutrition counseling private practice to help individuals navigate nutrition misinformation and build sustainable, positive relationships with food. She's an anti-diet, weight-inclusive practitioner who works with clients to reduce guilt and shame around eating, reconnect with and learn to trust their bodies with food, and develop confidence in their food choices while promoting a positive body image at any size. Some of the things that I personally really love about talking with Liz is how embodied her ideology around health and food is from a holistic perspective. Her awareness of how to support our children in developing a healthy relationship with food without restriction or shame. And also, Liz, your commitment to the concept that people can be larger bodied and healthy at the same time. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here, and I know we have so many awesome conversations together, so it'll be very nice to get it all kind of into one more formal conversation that we get to hold on to indefinitely.
Absolutely. I know so many of our conversations, I'm like, we need a mic and a camera for this. Can we go back and just re-record what we just talked about impromptu?
Yes, I
Okay.
agree.
So, Liz, can you start by telling us, like, what does it mean to be a weight-inclusive, anti-diet dietitian?
Yeah, I know. It sounds like they're kind of opposing words, and I will say, like, our profession and the health industry as a whole is quite polarized right now. Like, we will see two sides of one where I will say, like, I graduated over 10 years ago, and we had more of that quote unquote obesity training where our role was kind of set to help people learn about nutrition and nourish their bodies, also with the idea that we will help people quote unquote get healthy by losing weight. And so as I started practicing, that was kind of this underlying goal that I had to help individuals with their eating while at the same time improving body composition or whatever that looked like from maybe more of a body mass index or BMI scale. And I will say very early in the career, I started to feel very conflicted with the messaging that I was providing to clients, where I sought out kind of additional training for eating disorders. And I would have one client where we were trying to kind of undo the damage of diet culture and that fear-based messaging with food. And then my next session, I would have a client trying to lose weight and count their calories or count their macronutrients. And it seemed like I was essentially providing the recommendations that I was trying to help heal with the other client. And so in about, I think it was early on, like 2018, I was like, maybe this isn't the profession for me. I don't feel like I'm necessarily helping people long term because these feel like very short term fixes. And that is when I found kind of the weight inclusive dietitians group. We kind of started one at Vancouver General Hospital as well. And I started really learning about intuitive eating, mindful eating, connecting with our bodies with food, learning about the harms of the diet industry and diet culture, and really expanding my view of what the weight science shows and how it's not as black and white as I think kind of the quote unquote obesity epidemic kind of marketing and messaging that we're sold. It's not that clear. And it's not it doesn't need to be presented as such a fear-based, harmful way of approaching how we feed and take care of ourselves. So the anti-diet piece is really anti believing that we need to engage in restrictive dieting in order to promote our long-term health and well-being. And the weight inclusive piece is being inclusive of all body sizes and really honoring that healthy bodies come in all shapes and sizes, and we can engage in health promoting behaviors at any size, and we do not need to conform to a certain body size in order to achieve health, beauty, success, worth, moral virtue, whatever it is that the diet industry has sold us. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. You know, it's it's interesting to me because I've been in the complex chronic illness world for many years now, and there are so many reasons that somebody might be heavier bodied, right? And one of the things that I always come back to, like without having the expertise in nutrition and dietitian science that you have, is where is the value in somebody feeling so much shame about their body? There isn't, right? So whether for me, on my perspective, like whether it is from diet or food or from some other health challenge or, mobility limitations, like there's all of these different pieces that can lead to somebody being heavier bodied, and nobody heals through shame. So if the goal really is health, the way that so many people, I have lots of people in my life who, come back to that narrative of that I need to be a certain body size or that I need to lose weight in order to be healthy, and that my weight is a sign of whether or not I am healthy, right? And no matter like whatever the root cause is of somebody's body size, if that person's intention and goal really is for that individual to be healthy, then cut the bullshit with the shame.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody is going to heal through shame. So for all of those people who have this like strong need to tell somebody that they need to lose weight in order to be healthy, or that their body is this like distinctive measure of how healthy they are, that is not contributing to their health in any way.
I completely agree. Shame is a very short-term, futile motivator for people. And if we try to take care of ourselves through a lens of shame or fear of judgment or comments that have been made, there's no internal motivator to keep that going. And there's no sense of peace or alignment with what your health values are. And whatever we engage in is going to feel as icky as that shame and comments were to begin with. And like diet culture's whole MO is to equate thinness with health, and to use kind of our external physical appearance as this like be all end all to judge others on what their health status is. And not only is that so incorrect on so many levels, but it's like extremely fat phobic. It's rooted in fear and shame. There's like colonization, like it's rooted in so many things. There's racist roots to it as well. And I think that if we kind of feed into this by assuming that all weight gain is bad and all weight loss is good, we really are encouraging a lot of unhealthy and disordered behaviors in the pursuit of that very so-called clear system or clear measure of health.
When you look at it through like a somatic and energy healing lens, the lens that I take for everything, when we develop shame around food and our bodies and nourishing our bodies, we start to disconnect from our bodies. And so in somatic inquiry and somatic parts work, somatic healing work, you can't actually begin that healing process until you develop that foundational layer of being able to reconnect with your body and your felt senses in the first place. And so we end up just really like shooting up. All of our energy goes up into our head. It's like we get cut off at the neck, and now we're like not connected to our interoception, our proprioception. Our neuroception is often like really miswiring, like finding danger where there doesn't need to be danger, because we're perceiving all of these different things as threats that we internalized as a threat. So we might internalize food as a threat, or, you know, a number on a scale as a threat, or having to go up in pant size as a threat. You know how many people like cannot just buy the next pant size so that they're comfortable? Like, you deserve to be comfortable in your body and in your clothes.
Agreed.
Right.
Very much agreed.
And from a
Yes.
somatics perspective too, like, I don't know if you saw the video I made on Easter weekend, but I had to go to a family event, and there was some pieces that I was navigating like somatically and with discomfort in my body and symptoms. And one of the pieces that I incorporated to accommodate myself and to support myself through that was making sure that I was wearing clothing that was adding a layer of proprioception to my body. So like, you know, yoga pants that are high, or like, or thick waistband sweats, or, you know, leggings, something that gave me that proprioceptive input across my midline so that it could cue to my nervous system that I was safe. It's creating that that containment to my body to cue these signals that I am safe. And so one of the things that happens when we cannot even wear clothes that fit us because we're too ashamed to go up in a size, or we're too ashamed to be seen in our bodies, so we dress like really, really way bigger than what we need to, like whatever that means for you, is that we start to remove some of these natural accommodations and natural proprioceptive supports for ourselves too, because we have so much shame in, you know, being seen, or in changing our size, or whatever that may be.
Sorry, I see that a lot. And I think the other side of it that I find very common as well, especially with my digestive health clients, they refuse to buy clothing that fits their bodies, which is the purpose of clothing, to have it fit our size and our where we're at in our lives. But instead of sizing up, they will continue to wear the old sizing. And I kind of compare it to wearing shoes that are too small. Will we be able to kind of go through our day and not think about our feet constantly if my shoes are a size or two sizes too small? I will continuously be focused on my feet, unable to engage in anything else that's going on with my body or my day or my environment. And I may kind of, with the diet culture teachings that we've experienced, spend the day thinking how I wished my feet were smaller, instead of that mindset shift of these shoes are too small for me and no longer serving me. I need to go get bigger shoes. And people will do that often with their waist, abdominal area. They spend the whole day with something digging into them and feeling like my body must be the problem. This is something that I will have to get a handle on soon because I have to unbutton my jeans when I sit down in my meetings. And that is not a you problem. That is a pant problem. And it is okay and expected for our bodies to change and morph as we go through the stages and chapters of our lives. We are sold this idea that women are meant to be the way that they looked when they were 18 years old throughout their lives, and we are not supposed to sag or wrinkle or gray or get larger. And there are so many reasons why those things happen, and many of them are protective. And so I think giving ourselves, like, I guess, some compassion and comfort that my body has changed and that's okay. I truly believe in body autonomy. Like, every person has the right to make decisions for their body and what works best for them. And if engaging in a restrictive eating practice is what is working for them in that stage of their life, there is no shame or judgment coming from me or the weight inclusive anti-diet practitioners out there. We understand like how pervasive this culture is and how we do have to try out different things to maybe realize, or for some people we call it hitting diet rock bottom, where we're able to realize, okay, this is taking away from the things that matter in my life. Like, one of the bigger ones I'll see is like no longer being able to engage in social events because the foods no longer align with what is required on a plan, for example. But what I will see, like often see, is this sense of we get two things when we engage in diets: a sense of control, where some people have maybe lost a lot of control when it comes to their health or eating. And food is a very, I think, concrete external thing that we can focus and regulate that has us feeling like we're taking control of our health again. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, except for when it comes from a place of restriction, fear, and excessive elimination that may not be evidence based. But I can see how when we regain that sense of control, we also gain the sense of community, especially when weight loss is associated with it. So I don't know if you experienced this, but when I've like lost weight in the past, all of a sudden all of these magical unicorn comments come out of nowhere, and everyone tells us how great we look and we've never looked happier, but we may on the inside be so underslept and close to burnout and undernourished in some ways. I mean, in your case, it sounds like you were eating more, which was wonderful. But for a lot of us, like that weight loss may have even been achieved through severe depression or a new medication that prevented us from eating enough food. And that feeling of community and praise and compliments really does continue to motivate us, along with that sense of control, where some people have like this very amazing reflection on those times when they were dieting and losing weight. And that feels like, oh, that was the best I ever felt. That's the best my body ever felt. I have to get back to that. But we sometimes don't remember how well we didn't feel sometimes in the process, and how
Yeah.
those practices weren't sustainable into our 60s, 70s, 80s. So if we're eating in a way that you can't see like old granny you eating that way, it may not be the best eating pattern for you.
I love that. I was about to share that as well. The comments and the validation, and even more than that, the difference, the stark difference in how people talk to
Mhm.
you, look at you, approach you, how they treat you is so different when you're in a larger body versus a smaller body. And that was something that I was living in the real moment. Like even my own family was connecting to me differently when I was a smaller bodied person versus how they did as a larger bodied person. And you go through the world and people treat you with a very different perception and lens than they do when you are larger bodied. And when you're somebody who goes from that drastic of a change, you know, in a couple years time, you're really experiencing that in the moment, right? And it's really, really obvious how different people treat you.
Yeah, I and while I don't have that lived experience, I think it's so important to amplify the voices of people that do have those experiences so that people can find that sense of community from the other side, that maybe this culture isn't looking out for our best interest and our health, and that the pervasive fat phobia, that the fear of weight gain, the fear of fatness, and the weight discrimination and weight stigma that individuals face in our society is unacceptable. It really is like the last, like socially, I want to say, quote unquote, acceptable form of discrimination, where people feel like, oh, if I comment on it or we don't make accommodations in terms of chair sizes in weight rooms and airplane chairs and accommodations for even like blood pressure cuffs, if we don't accommodate them, well, then they'll have to diet, they'll have to become smaller in order to fit our society. And that's really unacceptable because naturally bodies come in all shapes and sizes, and we cannot only be accommodating to smaller bodies.
You know what's really screaming at me while you say that is also this idea that our society has forever wanted to make women smaller. So not just
Yes.
physically, right?
Mhm.
They want women to be like smaller in the workforce, smaller in their needs, smaller in their house, keep them quiet, keep them contained, right?
Mhm.
And so these threads go through so many different pieces. I will say that when I was in a wheelchair, I experienced that same difference in how people perceive you. So in my experience, it hasn't only been weight based, although I was also like slightly larger bodied in the wheelchair as well, since I had been in bed for 18 months or whatever, you know. But it really is wild how people think that they can just show up so differently based on how you look.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add on to that, like wanting to shrink women. Like it starts as early as the early 1900s, where we can really see a rise in diet culture and thinness obsession every time there is like a shift in a political uprising. And like I'm not a I don't know a lot about politics, and like we can even see that kind of going on right now with the rise of skinny talk and GLP-1s. But we do get this very big sense that every time women's rights are changing or women's voices are amplified or there's a shift in the political climate, all of a sudden diet culture comes bigger and stronger to tell women to hate something about themselves, especially. And men experience this too. Like there is fat phobia and weight discrimination for men as well. Like the fat acceptance movement started kind of in the late 1960s, and it was like a political civil rights movement against fat-based discrimination. And so, like, it kind of got co-opted by thinner white women to become more like body positivity as we kind of entered the early 2000s. But at its core, it's a civil rights political movement for acceptance and inclusivity.
Can you just like bust the myth for me that it's calories in, calories out?
Yes. Okay. So this one is so rampant in the research. And we do see that in the short term, when we create a calorie deficit, initially the body does tap into our reserves to make up for that deficit, which leads to weight loss. So many of the apps will be like, oh, just subtract 500 calories from whatever your estimated calculation is of how much your body needs plus your activity, and then we take away 500 calories, and you should lose, they'll say like a pound a week is kind of the standard number. The problem with all of this is a bunch of things. The equation we use to estimate how many calories you need is it's an estimation, and it varies a lot based on past diets you've done, your genetics, your gut microbiome, hormones, all of that. So already we're starting off with an off number. The amount of calories your body needs each day changes based on how well you slept, where you are in your cycle, how much you've moved your body. So that's another error with the number that we're starting with. A lot of the like Fitbits and Apple Watches that track how many calories are burned, also a huge estimation because every body's going to burn different amount of calories for the same amount of movement. So we have this like very rough number that we're starting with, and then we're just taking out calories. And a lot of the time, it's way lower than what feels safe for our bodies. And our bodies are hardwired for survival. So whatever we throw at them, they are going to do whatever it takes to stay alive. So at the beginning, for a lot of people, that honeymoon diet, the first diet that they do, the weight comes off very easily. Not for everyone, but for a lot of people. This is the first time the body's been threatened with undernourishment. And it goes, let's just tap into our reserves. This is what we have them for. But after a few weeks, everyone's different for how long, but after a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks, 6 weeks, the body goes, okay, this isn't something we can sustain long term. So it starts to put in metabolic adaptations. So your metabolism and how your body functions changes in order to survive this prolonged undernourishment or starvation that we've put in. And so what happens, there's a bunch of things that happen, but the main two things is your metabolic rate kind of slows down. So your body starts to use less calories or energy to do the same things. So say I used to need 2,500 calories to do things. Now I might be only burning 2,000 or less than that. The second thing it does is it ramps up hunger hormones. and decreases fullness hormones. So now I have an increased urge to eat. I'm more drawn towards high fat, high carb foods because they give me faster or more energy in the foods that I'm consuming. My likelihood of overeating or binge eating when I do eat can increase. And again, this isn't for everyone, but if we sustain a calorie deficit for too long, eventually we experience all of those symptoms: low energy, increased cravings, increased hunger, poor sleep. Or if we're able to override that hunger, or we have other things suppressing our hunger, like caffeine, stress, medications, neurodivergence, other things that are going on, I may just be losing weight at a rate that then leads to things like iron deficiency, hair loss. I can't get into a deep sleep, poor recovery, all of these other kind of symptoms that can occur. But generally speaking, like calories in, calories out works for short term, and we see that in the research. But a lot of weight studies are only short term. They do not follow people for 2 years, 5 years to see what happens. And so when I tell people, like, okay, the research is showing that losing weight improves our health, we do not have a very healthy, sustainable way to help people lose weight and keep it off long term. Even bariatric surgery, there is a large number of individuals who regain the weight after bariatric surgery. And so there's not one solution that has been shown to be effective long term for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. One of the things, Liz, that I've noticed is that you have this really significant awareness of how easily people can fall into or be pushed into restricted or distorted eating patterns that are not serving them, and how there's like really rarely a one size fits all solution. And I know that this is something that you and I have discussed in length at the past, where especially when we're living with complex chronic illnesses, there are so many different narratives around food. And from what I have experienced and what I have witnessed in my guests as well, is that people who are living with severe complex chronic diseases would do almost anything to be better. And
Mm-hmm.
it can become, this goes way beyond just food, right? Like into different medications and treatments and like all sorts of different areas. But it can become really difficult to discern what is right for us as individuals, and can create this cycle around of shame and fear around food, when honestly, a lot of the time we're being blatantly told that different diets will like cure us, or that certain foods are hurting us, when often it's not that clear cut. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have been told that if I just went on an anti-inflammatory diet, or if I just cut out dairy and gluten, or if I just did blank, right? Just insert
Yeah.
diet here, that I would
Yes.
be better, and that I must just not want to get better if I'm not willing
Mm-hmm.
to do that, or if that doesn't feel right for me. And because I have done so much work to be connected to my body and my intuition, I have been able to more or less discern like what is right for me in that area. However, I would be lying if I said to you that I don't sometimes lie awake at night thinking, am I missing something by not doing this anti-inflammatory diet? Am I missing, some magical piece that is just going to totally take away all of my symptoms and put me back into a healthy, able body, just because I'm still eating nightshades and gluten and dairy? And do you know what I mean? And it's
Yes.
often, it's people who mean well, who have like those diets really served them. And the lengths that I have had to go to try to explain to people that I do have a history of pretty restricted eating, that I have a very complex past in regards to food when it comes to, you know, um, using food as comfort too much, or finding that sense of control in removing food altogether almost, and not eating for days, or um, having mast cell activation syndrome, and then going through this period of being able to barely eat at all because I was reacting to everything. And I've had to do so much work to come back into a positive relationship with food. And I've done a pretty good job of that, I think. And so then
Hmm.
when I find myself still occasionally lying awake at night going, what if they're right? What if they're right? And if I just did this diet, I would be totally cured. And am I just like holding myself back? Do I actually just not want to get better? Like, is there something further wrong with me where I just don't even want to get better because I can't bring myself to do this diet, and that I don't feel like it's the right choice for me? And so, what can you speak on that a little bit? Like all of these narratives that get thrown at us in this way of basically blaming us for being sick because those diets aren't our choice or don't feel like they serve us or for whatever reason are not accessible. There are so many reasons that some of those diets would not be accessible to somebody.
Yeah. Oh, I have so much to say.
I thought you might.
So, where do I start in my brain? Okay, one of the things that I always want people to consider when they're being presented with different dietary restrictions or options. What do I have to gain in trying this? And at what cost? What do I have to lose? And we do need to keep in mind like all of the pieces that play into our eating because food is so much more than just nutrients. It is connection, emotional comfort. There are financial constraints. There is like lack of cooking skills. And there's sometimes we're the sole caregiver for a bunch of children or aging parents. And there's so many things that impact our ability to even nourish our bodies in the first place, let alone follow a more elaborate or restrictive elimination diet or eating pattern. And so the first thing is like kind of writing out what could I potentially gain in trying this out. And a lot of the things that are going to be on that side are the things that we are kind of sold from the industry or from people that are either like, yeah, selling their own plans or supplements or their own experiences. I will say that the research doesn't support any one specific eating pattern or elimination diet for a lot of the conditions that I think people with complex chronic illnesses struggle with, like chronic fatigue syndrome and POTS and fibromyalgia and even like chronic Lyme disease. There is no one diet that has been shown to achieve the symptom relief or healing that I think individuals are seeking out. And what I often see is an exacerbation of undernourishment, restrictive thoughts around food, disordered thoughts around food, more stress and anxiety around eating, pulling away from social environments, increased financial burden of buying like juice cleanses and supplements that don't have any scientific validation. There are a lot more negatives that come from that decision than there are potential positives. Now, here, like if someone has the privilege, financial privilege, time privilege, ability privilege to be able to try out some of these things, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that isn't harming us through nutrient deficiencies or, for example, our gut health. So the more restrictive we are with our eating, every time we cut out an entire food group or a variety of different foods, we are decreasing the variety of foods that are exposed to our gut microbiome. We are running the risk of not getting, say, enough fiber if I'm doing the ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, or enough B vitamins if I've gone low carb, or I don't know, maybe I've chosen to become plant-based, which is also totally okay, but we might run the risk of B12 or iron or calcium deficiencies or iodine deficiencies in the process. So if that is something that you're interested in participating in and it's not going to have kind of red flags or it become at too big of a cost, make sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't feel like shame-based or that you have to do it, and that you're doing it because you're genuinely curious on if it would support your overall well-being, and do it with a time limit and with support. So I really encourage people, if they're trying things, like try it for 3 to 4 weeks and do it alongside a provider that can help ensure you're doing it in the safest way possible. I've helped a lot of clients try diets that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but doing it kind of in the least harmful way, just so that they can kind of cross it off their mental list and say, okay, we know that that didn't make a difference. And one of the things that I think has the biggest impact on clients with chronic illness is just not eating enough. And so when we layer on not having nightshades, gluten, dairy, like refined sugars, we are just increasing the complexity of not being able to nourish our bodies throughout the day. So when someone comes back from I don't know, they saw something online or they want to try cutting things out, I really like to start with an additional approach. What are you currently eating? And what can we add in that gives us those benefits? Like the anti-inflammatory diet, I can take whatever it is I'm having. Say I was having like donuts all day long. We're going to keep those for calories and fuel and carbohydrates and B vitamins. We're not taking them away, but we're going to layer in fruits and vegetables that have the benefits of the anti-inflammatory pattern, nuts and seeds that have those benefits, oily fish if we can. There are some supplements that we might want to consider. What can we add, and start with before we even consider, okay, I'm doing all the things I can add. Now I'm going to look at, are there some things that I could potentially try taking away short term and see if that makes a difference. But starting from a restrictive mindset, it usually snowballs and isn't sustainable and leads to more harm in the.
Through my work at the BC Center for Long COVID, Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, and Fibromyalgia, through my private practice, and then like through my lived experience, what I have found to be one of the absolute like top tier most important things for recovery is reconnecting with your body and developing that sense of safety within your body, right? Because somewhere along the way, we disconnected from our bodies. Our bodies became an unsafe place to be for good reason. But now we have to do that work to come back there. And as we do that, there's so much healing available to us in there. And it leads us into all of these deeper layers that offer this compounding effect for healing many symptoms and getting back to a sense of life again, right? A sense of ability and strength again. And if I have to be so focused and hypervigilant on, and that's the key word there, that hypervigilance. If I have to be hypervigilant about what I'm putting in my body, because I believe that if I accidentally consume the skin of an apple today, that I'm going to derail my entire recovery process, then I cannot feel safe in my body. I cannot find calm and find stability and find safety in any way, right? And so if we can't heal in a state of fight, flight, freeze, then how can we really heal if we have to carry that hypervigilance with us every single day? It's not to say nobody does it, but that's my genuine question. Like, I know you can't answer it, but that is my, question towards a lot of those diets is, is this creating hypervigilance?
Yeah, it really does. And like, this is why, I mean, we'll talk about intuitive eating later, but intuitive eating is what I see almost as the opposite of dieting. And when we talk about anti-dieting, we're anti the idea that foods have this huge power, that people talk about these foods healing things and these foods causing disease. All foods fit in a healthy eating pattern, and there is not one food that will cure a disease, and there is not one food that will cause disease. And walking through life and nourishing our bodies 4, 5, 6 times a day with that underlying fear that I may eat something that will cause disease is extremely stressful and does not allow us in those moments to be at peace, tune into how our bodies are feeling, determine what type of hunger we're experiencing, and make an informed, intentional decision about what will best nourish my body in that moment. And the more like layers of restriction we add, the more stress we incorporate and the more anxiety and the less trusting we can be of our body's maybe we're drawn to dairy and gluten that day for a variety of reasons because they're very nutrient dense foods. But we now have this instant, oh, I can't trust those cues. I cannot listen to my body. I have to eat this instead. And there's only so long that we can ignore our body's signals and sensations before something overrides. And that leads to a binge of some sort.
Not only that, in my work, it leads to all sorts of other disconnection, like I was saying earlier, right? The more that we go, oh, I can't listen to my body, I can't eat that thing because it goes against this other belief that I have, or this, understanding that I have, we start to disconnect and shut down our intuition over and over and over again, to the point where like now we don't even know what is right for us at any given time because we're in this internal battle because we have silenced our intuition for so long, right? I want to talk about mast cell activation syndrome, like on this same thread, because that was a big piece for me. So for the people listening who don't know, like I was on really high therapeutic dosages of multiple mast cell activation syndrome medications. I was still going into anaphylaxis on 8 pills a day I was taking to manage this. And at some points I could not eat almost at all. Like there was like very few foods that felt safe. And what was happening for me was that my histamine bucket and my hypervigilance and my, the overwhelming sensations in my body were so high that I could not predict what I was going to react to on what day. And for some people with mast cell activation syndrome, they can pinpoint like clear foods that are triggers for them. And so that's great. Then like honor that, right? That was not my personal experience. I was never able to pinpoint exactly this food triggers me all the time. For me, it was, I knew that chemicals triggered me all the time. I knew that fragrances triggered me all the time. But I was at this point where my histamine bucket was so high that I was getting these reactions even with food without them having this clear link. I would eat one thing one day and be totally fine. I'd eat it another day and I'd have a reaction. And so some of the things, like I've had to take a really balanced approach to looking at this because, again, going back to what I said earlier, like developing a really restrictive eating pattern was not, or diet in order to support this was not something that felt like the right choice for me because of that hypervigilance. So fast forward to now, and I'm actually 100% off of all of my mast cell activation medication, and I'm doing really well. And there's like, for a lot of the people watching this, they've probably already learned that and already watched the free mast cell activation syndrome somatic lesson that I have that like dives a lot deeper into this. But basically what I have learned is that I need to eat through intuition. I need to take a bit of a balanced approach. So what I do look at is how long has this leftover been sitting? Like, because as soon as it's a leftover, the histamine starts to build. And I think like can't remember the exact timeline, but I think it's like within 2 days, your histamine level has doubled within that leftover in general. And so, putting things into the freezer immediately so that I don't have to worry about eating a leftover later. I also, if I have learned that I need to have a really clear access to a felt sense of safety when I eat something that I might be concerned about. So every time that I was going to eat something that maybe was possibly linked to a trigger in the past that we weren't really sure about, I would evaluate within myself, how safe do I feel right now? And does this feel like a good choice for me? Or do I just need to stick to a safe food today? Something that I know is safe, right? And then being able to lean into that instead of feeling like shame and guilt and that sense of being like too much and a burden around that. And so what happens in mast cell activation syndrome is that our amygdala triggers our mast cells and our mast cells trigger our amygdala. So if we come into contact with a trigger, that trigger triggers the mast cells. And then those mast cells trigger the amygdala. And then now you're having this like fight, flight,
Cycle.
freeze response in your body, in addition to the mast cell activation, mast cell degranulation. But it also happens the other way around. So if I'm really nervous about eating something,
Mm-hmm.
now my amygdala is triggering mast cell degranulation and I'm eating the thing that may cause the trigger. And now, was it my anxiety that triggered this reaction, or was it this food that triggered this reaction? And I don't have a way of knowing, right?
Yeah.
Besides like intuition, maybe, right? And so what I learned was, as I slowly was like coming back to a place where I was able to eat a little bit more, really connecting in with that felt sense of safety, doing some somatic work before eating, making sure that I was really connected with my body as I'm actually eating the food, right? So I'm not like watching TV, I'm not multitasking, I'm actually sitting and being with my body while I'm engaging in the act of eating. And then I know that I am calming down my nervous system by doing that. And if I have a reaction to this food, well, then yeah, maybe it's the food, right? So really looking at this from a multidimensional lens, because otherwise I was down to like zero foods. Like I could eat apples with almond butter and I could eat oatmeal. I think that was like it for a while, right? So
Yes.
yeah, it really is looking at the nervous system, the foods we're taking in, like the different biological systems happening when you are eating, and how all of these different things are linked. And that's again why I don't think that this is a one size fits all fix
Yeah.
for every single person. And some
Yeah.
people are going to find that safety, that sense of safety, through the controlling of the food.
Yes.
Right. And so again, like if that's how you find that sense of safety, and then you go from there and you find a way to work in new foods as you go, then like do what works for you. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I had to take the opposite approach. I had to find the sense of safety in my body and then go from there, because we know
Yeah.
that line of seeking control takes me down a road I don't want to go, a road that my body, it does not serve my body.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that whole experience because it's such a common cycle that we see for a lot of individuals where I see it with mostly my IBS clients where either there's a triggering event that has shifted how their immune system functions or their gut functions, maybe high dose antibiotics, or they had a traumatic car accident, for example. Some people don't have a triggering event where these symptoms kind of just increase over time, or they're experiencing long COVID, for example. But we then start to experience an inability to digest or tolerate certain foods. And we start to notice bloating or abdominal pain or cramping, diarrhea, constipation. And there's so many things that can be impacting that. But then what happens is it leads to the diet becoming more and more restrictive, and that fear and anxiety around food getting higher and higher. And the more fearful and anxious we are coming into an eating experience, exactly like you described, the less we are able to be in that rest or digest state where our vagus nerve is functioning optimally and we're able to have proper blood flow to our gut and our body is able to not have acid reflux and able to digest those foods in an appropriate way. So we come into that in an anxious state. We eat, we expect it to feel awful. We do feel awful. And we add a few more foods to the list of things that we can't have. And we get to the place where now we're having like low energy intake and nutrient deficiencies exacerbate how we feel. Like an undernourished brain is a more anxious brain. Our amygdala is firing more when we have not enough calories regularly. And so, same with vitamin D deficiency, for example, we see more mast cell activation in a vitamin D deficient environment. And so, the more we restrict our eating, the less nutrients we take in, the less energy we provide to our brain, the more we enter that fight or flight state, the less we are able to digest our foods properly, the more starved our gut microbiome is, which further exacerbates our inability to digest food. And now we are down to just a few foods that the few little gut bugs that are left there can actually tolerate. And we are just kind of continuing this awful cycle. So to break it, exactly like you said, we have to work with practitioners that can bring back that felt sense of safety through mindful eating strategies, connecting with our body prior to eating, starting with a list of safe foods, and gradually building up that list over time. And we'll do that by slowly adding in a food that's similar to something already on your safe food. And having even, I know affirmations sometimes aren't all that they are promoted to be, but having simple affirmations that my body can digest this food. My body is meant to digest foods. I am safe. This food will nourish my body. I can build back tolerance for this food with exposure. Those kinds of messages that we can really retrain the gut to tolerate foods that have been avoided or restricted for a long time. But when we do that, there's going to be some symptoms, and we have to kind of get through it. I compare it to like if someone was a meat and potato eater their whole life and they want to start eating more fiber. You start adding in more whole grains and beans, you're going to be bloated and gassy, and your stools are going to be really loose and wild for a while. And it's going to feel like, oh my God, plants are the worst thing for me. But I promise you, if we keep doing that and work through it, you're going to get to the other side where you have improved gut health, lower cholesterol levels, improved like lower risk of heart disease and diabetes. So just because something is uncomfortable the first time doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to continue working on and moving through. And one other thing I'll add is when we are kind of whether you're in the phase of trying to decide if you should cut something out, or you're in a place where you have a very limited amount of foods that you can consume, start with that place of curiosity and observation. So a food and symptom journal can be really valuable to do for a few weeks, where we do not only like a journal of what you eat, it's not just that, and we're not tracking calories, we're writing down what we eat, and we can write down things like how we felt coming into that eating experience, how we felt leaving that eating experience, other triggers like how is your stress, how is your sleep, have we consumed alcohol, have there been big changes to our medications or things in our lives. And we can kind of see with time that either the symptoms are consistent no matter what I eat, so it's very clearly not the food, or we can start to see some patterns of, ooh, every time I eat apples, I have really bad diarrhea. And then we can come to a place of potentially intentionally eliminating a few foods for a few weeks and see if that improves the symptoms that we're trying to target.
Yeah, I love everything about that except the tracking.
I know. I know. And
I, along with, most of the guests that I work with, had to spend so many years tracking symptoms and just to get a
Mhm.
doctor to hear us, right? So
Yeah.
you have to bring in like logs and logs of your symptoms and how it impacts your daily living in order to get a doctor to even begin to listen to you. So it's
Yes.
funny that now anytime somebody suggests like tracking to me, I just immediately like shut down. I'm like, oh no, that's not gonna
Yes.
happen.
Yep.
One thing that I want to bring in, and by the way, that's not to decrease the value in it, because obviously I see the value. It's more just like my own medical trauma that leads
Yes, of
into that
course.
feeling.
Yep.
One thing I want to bring into this discussion, which this is going to be where your scope and my scope greatly differ, is one of the things that we also see and that I have had very big success with in my own experience as well is that our bodies remember everything. So if we have been in in a conflict with somebody else or ourselves while we are engaging in eating, our body can now register that food as a trigger because it's registering the trigger of that conflict with ourself or with somebody else. And so then when we go to eat that food again, without having this conscious awareness of it, our body can start to respond the way that it would have responded to that original conflict. And so in my work, like symptoms are messengers, right? If we cannot digest something physically, then we start to look at, is there something mentally, emotionally, spiritually that you're not digesting? Was there a conflict that you feel unable to digest? Is there something that feels too big to swallow? Is there something that you feel like you can't hold or can't be with or won't survive right now? Right. And so when it starts to come up through foods specifically, then we can start to look at not only recreating that felt sense of safety in our body while we're eating, but getting curious and intuitive about what could that underlying conflict be, because so many of us just continue to go through life feeling like, oh, we're reacting with these foods, when really our bodies are asking us to look back at that original conflict. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I never considered that of associating the food environment and the state of our bodies when we're consuming certain foods with future eating experiences.
It's the same
Yeah.
thing, like if you, in a more obvious way, if you were assaulted at a bar,
Yes.
every time you
Yeah.
go past that bar, your body
It's
reacts,
associated.
right?
Yeah.
And even if you're not really thinking too much about it, your body tends to have this response if you still have lingering conflicts that have not been resolved, or incomplete survival stress that has not been processed in your system. This starts to come up because our bodies are constantly showing us where we can heal and what is ready to be looked at this time. So
Hmm.
for me, every time I have a symptom, it's an opportunity to look at, what is my body asking me to look at right now? What might be asking to be healed in a bit of a different way right now? And so that's where I think it's so crucial to have all of these like multidisciplinary approaches, because I cannot advise somebody on nutrition and diet and allergies. Do you know what I mean? And you cannot advise somebody on the somatic healing process that might come with a food trigger, right? And so when
Yes.
we start to, and we don't want to bypass the other just because it's not our expertise,
Hmm.
right? So I don't want to make
Yeah.
an assumption that that somebody I'm working with is having a somatic reaction instead of an allergic reaction, right?
Yeah.
I want them
Yeah.
to go and do what they need to do to explore that through a medical doctor or a dietitian or an allergist or whatever it is that they need to do on the medical lens, while simultaneously working with me where my skill set is to offer the healing that is available there, right?
Hmm. Yes. And it is like the multidisciplinary approach is so crucial because there's, like I mentioned earlier, like food cannot cure things and it also won't cause disease either. But I think a perfect example is for irritable bowel syndrome. We for so long as a dietary approach have used the low FODMAP diet. I don't know if you've heard of the low FODMAP diet, but
Many times.
so this is where we are temporarily, not long term, temporarily eliminating foods that are highly fermented in the gut. So the bacteria are fermenting them and producing hydrogen and methane that are changing the motility and the function of the gut. And that is quite an intensive elimination diet. But then after that 2 to 4 week elimination, we challenge each of the foods to figure out what happened. There have been so many instances with clients where the elimination diet makes no difference in their symptoms. Even after we cut out all of those things, they still experience it. And we have new research showing that something like gut-directed hypnotherapy, where we're actually retraining the gut-brain connection and how they speak to each other, has been shown to be just as effective, if not more in some individuals, as compared to the low FODMAP diet. And what a valuable tool, and I would say less like what's the word?
Painful.
Effortful,
Yeah.
painful to do gut-directed hypnotherapy over eliminating all of my favorite foods for potentially like 2 to 3 months on end. And so I just, there's a huge opportunity to not quickly jump and point the finger at food and eliminate everything that has been told is toxic to us, and really kind of expand our perspective and consider, how am I showing up to my food experiences? How am I looking at food and thinking about food as a whole? How have I chosen to nourish my body over these years? Is there things that I can add to my eating patterns, not take away, but add to get more benefit from the healing properties of food? Because I won't argue that there are healing properties from food as well, but less of a shame, fear based mindset with it.
Thank you. We have a question from a guest.
Hmm.
The question is, do you have any tricks to decrease sugar cravings?
I love this question. Oh, okay. So when I we look at kind of cravings from that people are experiencing, we want to be able to kind of take a moment and ask ourselves, what is the underlying need that our body has in this moment? So, a sugar craving, a symptom, a signal, a message that our body is sending us that it is needing something. I like to describe four different types of hunger. I know there's a variety of ones kind of floating out there on the internet, but the first is physical hunger. And so when we experience a sugar craving, I'll ask myself, is this physical hunger? Has my body experienced or like gotten enough nourishment today to meet its energy needs or its calorie needs? If I haven't gotten enough calories, or I skipped a meal, or I haven't eaten in over 3 or 4 hours, or maybe my meals weren't balanced enough or big enough, then our body will send out intense cravings for sugar as a way to get a quick source of energy to make up for the lack of energy earlier in the day. So that's always the first question I ask, is at 3 o'clock when all of a sudden I like want to hit up a vending machine or eat a box of Girl Guide cookies, have I eaten enough today? Did I eat breakfast? Was there carbs at my lunch? Did I have an afternoon snack? That can be the first part. The second one is if I'm like, yeah, no, I just finished eating, I'm actually very satisfied. The next type of hunger is mouth hunger. This is for the purpose of pleasure and enjoyment and satisfaction. And it is very much part of the human experience to eat foods for joy. And that is not something that we need to shame. And so I can ask myself, am I looking for food for pleasure, for joy, for satisfaction, for connection in some way? And if that's the case, then I want to engage with this food in a very mindful way. Because often we've been told that sugar cravings are bad. And so we instantly kind of go into well, I either can ignore, and then eventually succumb to that craving in a bigger and more chaotic way, or I can address it, but we have that guilt, so we do it mindlessly. I go and I grab a cookie or I grab the ice cream carton and I kind of check out from that experience and I eat maybe a lot more than my body needed to feel that pleasure. So with mindful eating, we can talk about it after this, but we're going to use skills to tune into that experience and make sure that the brownie that you've picked up or the lollipop or the ice cream or the donut, we're making sure that that food that you're choosing to enjoy is enjoyable and that you get satisfaction from it and that you're slowing down and actually getting the benefit that your body wants from it. The third type of hunger is emotional hunger. Sometimes we have sugar cravings because we have an underlying unwanted negative emotion that we're feeling and we don't have the coping tools to address it. And for a lot of us from a young age, we use food as our go-to coping strategy. And it's not a bad one. It's kept us safe and alive for so long. But as we get older, we can start to ask ourselves, is food really addressing the underlying unmet need? Or is it time for me to explore and expand upon my coping toolbox? And if you're finding that, like, I don't know, Girl Guide cookies are going to be your coping every time you come back from a stressed, crappy day at work, we can start to kind of layer in other coping tools of maybe I take the Girl Guide cookies on a walk with me outside or into the bathtub. And that sugar craving might not be what fixes my stress. So over time, I can start to expand on what actually addresses this core stress or loneliness or boredom that I'm experiencing that leads to my need to have sugar at the same time. The fourth type of hunger is practical eating, which we use for more like when we don't have hunger cues and we need to kind of eat according to our body's needs, less according to hunger. So that one doesn't have anything to do with sugar cravings. But the first step is just building awareness. In those moments, as you're reaching for a bag of chocolate, ask yourself, is this potentially physical hunger? Is this mouth hunger and a need for pleasure and joy? Or is this an emotional unmet need that I could potentially explore addressing in different ways or healthier ways?
I feel like everything we've talked about so far has really laid a solid foundation for like what intuitive eating and mindful eating is, but let's go right into that to make sure that we're making it really clear and kind of bringing this whole conversation together. So, in your perspective, what is intuitive eating? More clearly than how we've talked about so many of the pieces so far that make up intuitive eating, but not actually what is intuitive eating. So, what is intuitive eating and how does it differ from traditional dieting?
Yeah, so I'm just so passionate about intuitive eating, and I'm so grateful to so Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch are two dietitians that put together this framework in the mid 90s. And it's essentially a non-diet approach. We could call it an anti-diet approach to promoting health. And I think a lot of the times people will confuse mindful eating and intuitive eating. And intuitive eating has also been co-opted by the dieting industry. I've seen books called Intuitive Fasting and other things that are still diets, but they're trying to kind of co-opt the language. At the core of it, it is essentially getting back to the intuitive eater that we were all born to be. So when we're born, we are able to cry when we're hungry, turn our face away when we're full. We experiment with a variety of foods if we have access to them. We are not thinking about things being good and bad. And as we grow up, depending on the food environment we have at home, or even just being exposed to the culture that we live in our society, we start to get this messaging that some foods are good, some foods are bad, some foods are healthy, some foods are unhealthy. We should finish all of our food before we leave the table, no matter how full you are. We can't waste food in this house, for example. We should ignore our hunger and be hungry a little bit longer so that we burn fat and lose a little bit of weight. There's so much of that messaging that gets deeply rooted. And the moral of all of those stories, unfortunately, is don't trust your body. Don't trust the signals and cues that your body sends you to naturally be able to nourish yourself adequately. And every body needs a different amount of food and different combinations of food to feel its best. And if we silence those cues, we get really confused about how we're supposed to feed ourselves. And it creates this perfect, I guess, clientele for the diet industry to have a bunch of teenagers or young adults ending up in a place where they maybe dislike their bodies or want to lose weight or fearing gaining weight. They don't know how to trust their signals and they don't know what healthy eating looks like. And then they're sold or presented with all of these eating plans, I guess. Now, intuitive eating is it's 10 principles to shift away from those external rules and restrictions. So if your eating has a list of good foods and bad foods, or foods you can and cannot have, or times of days that you can or cannot eat, that falls under more of a diet. The opposite would be leaning back into our intuition. So these 10 principles go through things that help us shift away from dieting. So the first principle is reject diet culture. And it's kind of scanning our environment to figure out, am I weighing myself every day? Are there dieting apps on my phone? Can I eat without tracking my calories? Back in the day, like what I've had dieting books all over my shelves at home, for example. So we're looking at how does diet culture show up in our everyday lives and how can we recognize the harms of it and shift away. And then there's other principles around honoring our hunger, learning to feel our fullness, learning to discover like the satisfaction around food, making peace with food, regaining that unconditional permission to eat, challenging the food police voice in our minds. And there's also components of rebuilding our relationship with movement and not feeling like it's a way to burn calories or punish our bodies. And then there's also a really big piece of it that's learning to honor our health with gentle nutrition. So one of the biggest myths I hear about intuitive eating is that it's the hunger fullness diet. You eat when you're hungry, you stop when you're full, and you eat whatever you want. But it's so much more than that. It's leaning back into what truly feels good for my body and how do we marry the science of nutrition with my own lived experiences to find this way of eating that isn't restricted by rules and is very flexible to how my life changes day to day.
Mhm. I love that. It weaves so naturally into the work that I do, right? In reconnecting with the body and integrating some of those parts of ourselves that really hold us back from connecting with our body and with what our body really needs. I honestly do believe that our bodies know exactly what they need when they need it. And, we just need to know how to connect our brain body connection so that we can perceive those cues accurately instead of through this fog of societal conditioning and familial conditioning and the various like belief systems or harmful systems that we have grown up with so that we can gain access to those clear messages from our bodies and then have that clarity and the confidence to actually act on it.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I think the this lack of trust that we walk around with, that our bodies don't know or our bodies have guided us down the wrong path before. It's how do we get back to that connection? And I will say, and like you know more about this than I do, but there are a lot of situations where some of the principles of intuitive eating may not be appropriate or accessible for people right away. So, like, for example, in instances where we are recovering from a restrictive eating disorder or we've experienced significant trauma and connecting to the body is not appropriate or safe right away. Maybe there are medications that are suppressing hunger or neurodivergence that is impacting our ability to nourish ourselves adequately. We won't always jump right in to just feeling our hunger and fullness and trying to become an intuitive eater in every case. And I think that it would be very futile and not successful for the majority of people if we did it that way. But I will argue that intuitive eating is accessible in some ways for everyone. Like everybody can benefit from rejecting diet culture. Everybody can benefit from repairing their relationship with movement or starting to challenge that food police voice in our minds that's so deeply ingrained. Everyone can benefit from, like Principle 8, learning to respect our bodies and acknowledging that genetics make up a large component of like who we are and our body composition. So a lot of these pieces come just with that unlearning and moving away from dieting. And we can layer on that ability to connect with our bodies as it's safe to, and we develop the coping tools and strategies to do so in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not afraid to share. I'm one of those people who has to combine mechanical eating with intuitive eating. And
Yes.
look at how much work I've done on intuition and connecting to my body. And I still struggle in this area. So, what that looks like for me is that I do not get enough calories in my day. And so my body
Mhm.
has gone into that state of holding and slowing down my metabolism in order to, keep me safe and keep me fueled in the way that it can, right? And so repairing that relationship with food has been a pretty long journey for me. And I do think that this links back a little bit to neurodiversity because I don't really have another way of explaining it because of all of the other work that I have done, right? But I can definitely hyper focus in on something and forget to eat for 12 hours, right? And like almost not even notice. A few of the pieces that I do to try to counteract this is as soon as I get up, I make sure that I have a protein shake. I have a hard time eating in the morning, but a protein shake is accessible to me. So I have found one that I love that is like a beef isolate protein shake. It's very few ingredients. It aligns with what I know to be good for me and to work for my body. And I throw in like a third of a banana and some high protein, non-GMO soy milk. Again, this is just what aligns for me. And then later in the day, I always have a cacao, like a cup of raw cocoa, which is just part of a ritual for me, part of like a slowing down ritual. You'll see it. It'll be up in the community sometime in the next few weeks. But basically, every afternoon, I take some time to just like pause and reconnect with my body and have this cup of cacao. And so, what I've done is I've incorporated some protein collagen into that drink. Again, just to make sure that I'm getting something automatically without having to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I have my handful of safe foods that are heavily protein based, like cottage cheese, plain Greek yogurt, and I always incorporate like strawberries or an apple or, something like that. So what I've done is I have these set pieces that I know are going to be naturally incorporated into my day, that are really easy to grab, that I know that I'm going to fuel myself if I'm not really thinking about it. So that's the more mechanical side of things. And then on the intuitive side of things is where I'm tapping into my body and my intuition and going, what does my body really want right now? What does my body really need? And especially when I'm working through anything that has a bit of fear based on my mast cell activation syndrome or any of the reactions that I've had in the past, I'm always checking back in with myself and my intuition to see, does this feel like it's going to be something that serves me today? Does this feel like it's something that's going to be safe for me today? And then that's how I evaluate what I'm going to eat next. And if I get a no in my body, like, no, this doesn't feel safe to me today, or no, this doesn't feel right, then I adapt. I go back to one of those safe foods, right?
This is a perfect example of how we can't just dive right into one framework and assume that it's going to work for everyone. And I would say that more often than not, I encourage people to start with mechanical eating so that they can reach a place where they know what their body can feel like when it's adequately nourished. Because if I'm coming into intuitive eating and I'm trying to figure out what my cravings are telling me and make peace with food, when I'm undernourished, like chronically undernourished, my cravings are going to be more heightened. My ability to notice my fullness or hunger is going to be altered. And eating is going to feel very chaotic. And that sense of control that I had from dieting is going to turn into a sense of chaos. And I see this a lot where people try intuitive eating and they go, whoa, 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 that was not for me. That was just crazy. And I think we really need to lean into this idea that there is a middle ground of sometimes requiring structure, mechanical eating, timers on our phone, maybe a supportive meal plan to get us going. This like general knowledge of what we should try to include in meals that include our safe foods to build back that nourishment, that feeling of trust with food and knowing what our bodies feel like in that kind of ideal state, to then be able to play with the nuance of, okay, do I have to eat every 3 hours? Can I shift it a bit earlier if I'm hungry or later if I still feel full? How am I thinking about these foods in between meals? And having a lot of tools in those situations where you're feeling very overstimulated or not feeling safe or not being able to connect with your body, how can we bring in coping tools to eat in those environments and also have a lot of compassion that we might only get really 2 good meals a day, and sometimes when we're out with others we may not be able to access the ability to eat everything that our bodies are needing. But what do we do before and after those situations to provide that care for our bodies so that we can still participate in the things that life throws at us or that we want to participate in? I would say that you have a lot more experience helping people connect with their bodies, but if I was working with someone who kind of expressed a desire to move away from dieting, but felt like they had no sense or idea of where to start in terms of what signals their body might be sending out to them, I would probably start with like gentle, mindful eating strategies. So we talked about intuitive eating being a 10 principle framework. Mindful eating is the act of bringing mindfulness or that being present with your body in the moment without judgment. We're bringing mindfulness into the eating experience. And a lot of people envision mindful eating as like, oh, have to put my phone away and I can't talk to anybody and I got to sit in a corner by myself and not watch TV. It's not realistic to ask people to be like completely distraction free all the time. But if we can, one thing that I'll kind of suggest is a 3 check-in points or 3 bite experiment. So for 3 of those bites that you take of any meal or snack or addressing of a craving, you're going to do a mindful check-in for the first bite, the midway bite, and whatever ends up being the last bite of that experience. And we're just taking an opportunity to come into that first bite asking ourselves, how is my body feeling? Am I really stressed out? Am I standing while eating? Am I in the car? Is this something I even have realized that I'm about to take a bite of? If I do take a bite of it, do I enjoy it? Is this tasty? Is it satisfying? Does it need more hot sauce? Like, what is that initial entry point into that eating experience? And a lot of people don't do that, where they mindlessly start eating something and it really gets away from them and they've consumed something they didn't really even want to have or that wasn't supportive of their bodies. So we can start there. Some people miss the first one and they don't even notice until maybe midway. So maybe halfway we check in and say, how's my body feeling now? Is this still something I want to keep eating? Where am I maybe on a hunger fullness scale? Am I starting to feel full? Am I still starving and that's why I'm eating so quickly? Is that craving addressed? Am I actually just feeling really lonely and the food's not helping at all? And if I have an opportunity to check in at the end, this last bite check-in is to see, like, how did this make me feel? How am I leaving this food? Do I need more food? Did I potentially eat too much and my body's not feeling great about that? There's no judgment. It's all curiosity check-in points to see if we can grab onto points of connection where our body really is screaming at us and we just haven't had the opportunity to listen. And if you try one of these at any of the 3 bites and you really can't get anything, like there's no, I don't know, signals or messages being sent, then we can have more like separate activities where we sit down with a chocolate chip and we have it be more of a specific situation. But most of the time, there's something your body is telling you that we just haven't listened to before. And every time you do that, you're just gathering more information for the next time you nourish your body or choose a food or eat something. I feel like we touched on a lot of really awesome points and all the things that I wanted to kind of cover with you. I mean, we could talk all day, I feel. I mean, I guess kind of just in summary, there's so many different ways to eat, and healthy eating is going to look completely different to each and every person. There is no right or wrong way. There are no good or bad foods. All foods fit in a healthy eating pattern. What we want to ask ourselves is, am I eating this way out of fear or a rule or something that I learned or shame? Or am I eating in a way that I'm curious to see if this will improve my overall health? And everything that we do with food is an experiment. We're just gathering more information to figure out how to better feed ourselves tomorrow. And so whether you are practicing diving into mindful eating practices, whether you want to shift away from restrictive dieting and lean more into intuitive eating, whether you are dabbling in a short-term elimination diet to identify your triggers, or you are trying like a low histamine diet or a low FODMAP diet, all of those eating patterns and ways that you get there are valid, but just make sure that you're asking yourself, what do I gain from this and at what cost? And then at the end of the day, it comes back to how you see yourself eating for your life, your whole life. And we want to find the most varied, least restrictive way of eating that allows you to meet your calorie and nutritional needs on a regular basis and allows you to live your life to the fullest, where you're not stressed or anxious about food at all, ideally.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So how do people find you? What does it look like to work with you? I know that you have a couple of different options, like a program that is self-guided, and then you also have your one-on-one private practice. What does that look like? Tell us about that.
So if you go to YaletownNutrition.com, On my services page, I have a few different packages based on how many sessions you want to commit to at the beginning. But a lot of people just start with the Jumpstart package, which is just one session. I can do direct billing depending on your extended health benefits plan. And in that first session, we will do the full nutrition assessment where we kind of identify what the biggest goals and barriers are to healthy eating for you and what that looks like for you. And then we talk about strategies and what to start with. And with everything nutrition, it's a big puzzle, whether it's digestive health issues or repairing your relationship with food, or you want to work on your body image, or you have high cholesterol or celiac disease and you're trying to avoid gluten. Whatever that looks like for you, we will come up with kind of the first steps. And then in each follow-up session, we see how that's going and we adjust and adapt as needed. And if people are recovering from eating disorders or struggling to nourish themselves adequately, I can also do supportive meal plans, but with a full disclaimer that we can't live off of meal plans forever. And so I usually try to help people learn how to plan for themselves rather than being given 7-day meal plans week after week. But there's a lot of different things that we can do depending on where people are starting from.
Okay, and tell us about your Nourished course.
Oh, so this one I released right before I gave birth to my first daughter 5 years ago. And I will say it does need a bit of updating, but it is 6 modules with 6 lessons in each. And they're fairly short lessons, but they do take us through what I feel to be all of the strategies to set a good foundation for healthy eating. So wherever you're coming from, we talk about meal timing and adequate hydration and how do you get enough protein and what supplements should we be considering based on where we live and what eating patterns we follow. And then it does touch on a few of the modules are repairing your relationship with food and also how to improve your body image. So that one is also the Nourished course on the website. And it is self-led, self-guided. So you can go through it as quickly or as slowly as you'd like. And when you do register, I also will include like 30-minute check-in calls throughout the process to help put the content that you're learning into context of your own eating and life based on what I see and what I would recommend.
Oh yeah, that's so nice. That's such a good addition. And now for our private Embodied Soul with Denise Elysa community, the people who joined us live today and who will be receiving this full length, like unedited, deep dive months before it goes out publicly, like the shorter version on the Coming Home to Ourselves podcast. Can I drop your email or something in there for them if they have follow-up questions or they want to connect with you? Maybe they want to learn how to work with you or anything like that on a more individualized way.
Yes, definitely. And if they have like a question of something they saw online and they want an evidence-based answer, send it my way. You can follow me on Instagram too if you want, but I'm not the best at posting, but I'm trying to get better. 2026 goal. Yeah.
Liz, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving this full deep dive for the Embodied Soul with Denise Elysa community members, and also for letting us cut this down into a podcast episode for the Coming Home to Ourselves with Denise Elysa podcast. And mostly just thank you for showing up as, you know, such an authentic version of yourself. That's something that I really admire, is that there's so much pressure within our society and within the diet culture and the medical system and all of these different things to show up in a certain way or to carry these different ideologies that are so deeply ingrained in us around food and diet and body image, that, like you said, it really trains us to disconnect from our bodies, disconnect from our intuitions, and to stop listening to our internal body cues and stop honoring that for ourselves. So I really just think that the work that you're doing is so needed and so powerful. And thank you. And I think that there is so much shame that goes on within the medical system and within, you know, the dietitian realm sometimes. And so that perspective that you bring that really honors like the whole body and the whole person, and that you genuinely believe that people can be healthy at every size and all of these different pieces. I think that that is a perspective that we're really starved for.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me here, and I I love the work that you do, and I think it's so intertwined with how we nourish our bodies and intuitive eating, and it's so needed because that ability to connect with ourselves and that sense of safety to even try and practice mindful eating is like what you do is so needed in that sense. And so I think a lot of the times food is blamed, but I think our nervous system is really at the core of a lot of these symptoms and conditions that we experience.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
As always, I am trusting you to take what resonates with you and leave the rest behind. Full extended versions of many of my episodes for Season 3 can be found in the Embodied Soul with Denise Elysa community app. If you'd like to join our recordings live and have the opportunity to send in questions in advance, that's the place to do it. If my podcast resonates with you, it would mean the world to me if you'd leave me a rating, review, positive comments, or likes, as those are so important on these platforms, and be sure to hit subscribe. If you'd like to dive deeper than what these platforms can provide, I invite you to explore my Embodied Soul with Denise Elysa community app, a virtual sanctuary where you can connect more deeply with yourself and others in a supportive environment while developing the tools to awaken your own self-healer. You are the medicine.